scripture lesson comes from the Gospel of Luke. Another wonderful story of healing. If you think about it, Jesus spent a lot of time healing, didn't he? So let us hear this wonderful word and let it enlighten our own spirit. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But Jesus answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? Ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who Satan bound for 18 years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. So I want to start out today's sermon with another Harry Chapin song. It's called "Flowers Are Red." Hear this great story in the lyrics of this song. A little boy went first day of school. He got some crayons and started to draw. He put colors all over the paper, for colors was what he saw. And the teacher said, "What are you doing, young man?" "I'm painting flowers," he said. She said, "It's not the time for art, young man. And anyway, flowers are green and red. There's a time for everything, young man, and a way it should be done. You've got to show concern for everyone else, for you're not the only one." And she said, "Flowers are red, young man, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." But the little boy said, "There are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flower, and I see every one." "Well," the teacher said, "you're sassy. There are ways that things should be, and you'll paint the flowers the way they are, so repeat after me. Flowers are red, young man, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." But the little boy said, "There are so many colors in the rainbow, and so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flower, and I see every one." The teacher put him in a corner. She said, "It's for your own good, and you won't come out till you get it right, and all responding like you should." Well, finally he got lonely. Frightened thoughts filled his head, and he went up to the teacher, and this is what he said. And he said, "Flowers are red, green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." Time went by like it always does, and they moved to another town. And the little boy went to another school, and this is what he found. The teacher there was smiling. She said, "Painting should be fun. And there are so many colors in a flower, so let's use every one." But the little boy painted flowers in neat rows of green and red. And when the teacher asked him why, this is what he said. And he said, "Flowers are red, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they have always been seen." Sometimes we get so caught up on the rules and the regulations, we can't see all the colors in life. I had an experience very much like this in 5th or 6th grade, and it caught me by surprise because the teacher was very nice. But I imagine now, looking back at it from my adult mind, that as she was doing her lesson plan, she was trying to expand our artistic experiences by having us do a still life. And I'm guessing that she read somewhere that a still life is a picture with inanimate objects in it. And you're not really supposed to like paint the table the objects are sitting on or draw them on the chairs. Like, in other words, you're not supposed to draw it as though you're looking at it from across the room. You're drawing it as though you're looking right down on it. Well, one of the things that I loved more than anything else in school was drawing, because I'd been doing it since I was a little boy. I doodled my way all the way through graduate school. It was a wonderful thing. And so my imagination was clicking. And with my wonderful mind, I came up with this story. And so I drew a table, but I just drew the corner of the table, one corner of it, and then a chair coming out of the side with just the back of the chair. And on the table, I drew this wonderful Roman soldier's helmet, you know, with the red thing on the top of it, and I had used gold. I mean, it was a beautiful thing. And then on the table, I'd used a skill that I had just learned how to do called foreshortening, where you're able to draw something on a two-dimensional surface, but you're able to draw it in such a way that it looks like it's going back. And so I put the sword on the table with the blade coming out, and then on the chair, draped over the back, was a scroll. And on the scroll was this message that he was to report to war. I was so proud. It was good. And I got scolded in front of the classroom because I drew the corner of the table and I drew the back of the chair. She couldn't see the absolute masterpiece that was right before her eyes. Because in her mind, a still life didn't show any of the table whatsoever. A nephew of mine, delightful child growing up, very imaginative, and he's grown up to be a delightful young man, Justin. He came home from Thanksgiving school break, and he had drawn a turkey, and he drew this turkey for his grandparents. And when he showed his grandparents this turkey, it was a glory to behold. A peacock would have been jealous. Every color in the 64-color Crayola box was used on this turkey. And his grandfather was a wonderful man and by no means meant to put him down, but said to him teasingly, "I ain't never seen a turkey like that." And instantly, Justin responded, "It's a turkey from another universe." Steve Case was told by a teacher one time he'd never be a writer. Don't even dream about it. Sometimes teachers get it wrong, don't they? Sometimes we get so caught up in the rules that we don't see the miracle right before our eyes. The rulers of the synagogue saw this very colorful character named Jesus come into their midst. And Jesus brought all the crayons from the Crayola box into the synagogue that Sunday. And it was a Sabbath day. That meant you're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. And there was very clear rules as to what was considered work. For example, you could have 2 or 3 buttons in your pocket, but if you went over that, it was considered work. So Jesus sees a woman who comes in, and she has been bent over for 18 years. And as you could imagine, it was a very debilitating condition that she had. And he had compassion on her. He said, "Come over here." He says, "Be set free from your ailment." Isn't that wonderful? Did that resonate with any of you when you heard that? Be set free from your ailment. Whatever it is that binds you and has you stooped over, be set free. And he healed her. And everybody in the synagogue started rejoicing. Why did they rejoice? Because they saw something pretty spectacular? I imagine they rejoiced because they knew the woman. And they knew how she suffered. And here she has been set free. And as they were all celebrating and praising God, the rulers of the synagogue said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, everybody, this is getting out of control. You got 6 days in the week to get cured. Do that then. Don't do it on the Sabbath." I don't blame the rulers of the synagogue. That was their job, right? To keep the rules. To keep the rules. It was important that everybody obeyed the rules, the doctrines, and the traditions. When you look at the context from which they come to this, it helps us to understand that maybe they just weren't being stick-in-the-mud religious people who couldn't celebrate life, but there was a very real experience that came with these rules, traditions, and doctrines. In Israel's history and the southern kingdom of Judah, the Babylonians came and destroyed Jerusalem and sent all the people into exile. They couldn't believe that this was happening to them. Then about 150 years later, King Cyrus of Persia defeated the Babylonians and allowed the Israelites to go back home. And not only that, he built them another temple. As the people were asking the question, why did God allow this to happen to us? This is what they concluded after they rediscovered the book of Deuteronomy. God allowed it to happen because we sinned against God so badly. So then the next logical question is, well, what must we do to make sure God never does this again? And the answer is, we'll never what? Sin again. But how do we know what's sin and what is not sin? And thus the law. There are 360 rules that continue to build and build and build over the centuries. So that's the context that the religious rulers and leaders in the synagogue were coming from. If we allow this very colorful man Jesus to come in and start letting people think that somehow they do not keep the rules and the laws, then maybe God will send another group from some other country to come and destroy us and put us all away. So you can kind of see the context from which they were making these judgments on. Unfortunately, the religious rulers used the same rules, the same laws, the same doctrines, and the same traditions to put Jesus to death because he was just too big of a threat to the status quo. And so in order to make God happy and to protect humanity, they put Jesus to death. In 70 CE, the Romans completely destroyed Jerusalem, the city, and all the people in it. So their strategy did not work very well. Evidently, that's not what God had in mind, is keeping the rules, the traditions, and the doctrines. Now, I am not a person who thinks that rules are bad. I'm not an anarchist. I know that we need rules. We do. We need basic rules and understanding in order to be able to function as a society. When the Israelites were leaving Egypt, what was one of the first things that God did with Moses? Give them a set of rules. The first 4, love God and only God, and the other 6 were, okay, don't covet your brother's goods because you might steal them and your brother might kill you. Don't covet and lust after your brother's wife and commit adultery because then your brother might kill you. Honor your parents. Don't steal from one another. So some just basic rules of life. So rules are fine, but sometimes we can allow the rules to take such a precedent in our lives that we can't see anything else that's going on. And that's what happened on that day in the synagogue with Jesus, with the religious leaders of the synagogue. For they were looking at God and spirituality as flowers are red, young man, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen. The religious leaders were blinded by their rules, traditions, and beliefs. I took an art class one time at the Maitland Art Center. Actually, I was there for about 4 years. And I remember one of the semesters that we were in the class, there was this lady who came in, and she didn't stay very long. She was like maybe 3 or 4 weeks, but she was obsessed by the rules. I don't know that she ever put a bit of paint on a canvas because she wanted to know what the rules were. Now, my teacher, Barbara Tiffany, was a wonderful teacher and one of the most special people in my life. She patiently taught the women about composition. Okay, look, here we have it all set up for you. And here are your primary colors, and here are your secondary colors. And look how the reflected light and cast shadow work. And so Barbara tried to kind of teach her the basics of art and painting, but she was so obsessed about the rule for painting the color, the rule for putting the stroke on the canvas, that she never, ever drew anything because of the rules. Some of us will never see ourselves, God, or the miracles around us because we're so focused on tradition, beliefs, and rules. We see the world in black and white when God has provided a world for us in a 64-count Crayola box. All were rejoicing, regardless of the Sabbath. They were rejoicing because a friend of them had been healed. If you think about it, all of the beliefs and traditions and rules that we usually have, we inherited when we were children. You didn't consciously decide what was right or wrong. Typically, you knew what was right or wrong contingent upon the people that you were living with. I was raised in the Baptist church and tradition, not because as a child I chose it, but because my parents were. Some of you were Catholic. You didn't choose to be Catholic and inherit all the guilt that comes along with it, but you inherited it. Some of the opinions that we have about people, groups of people, kinds of people, if we hold any biases or prejudice against any bigotry, it's something typically we inherited from the people and the community that we grew up in. And if we're lucky and listen to the Spirit within us, we can somehow transcend that and determine who we are and what we believe. I've shared this with you before, but I'll share it again. When I went to seminary in 1982, I went there with my theology in a wonderful little box about this size. And I was looking for that 3 years of seminary to put a beautiful wrapping upon that box so that I could share my beautiful little theology box with the world around me and save the world. Unfortunately, the first semester of seminary crushed my little box. It blew it to smithereens. I don't know if any of you watch Mythbusters, but they had an episode one time where they put a lot of explosives inside of a cement mixer, and they exploded it, and the cement mixer disappeared. You couldn't find it. It was gone. No remnant of it anywhere. And that's what happened to my little theology in a box. And it was scary. I got to tell you, it was very scary because everything that I based my life upon was in that box. And if that box is no longer there and those beliefs and those traditions no longer held water, I was out there in the wilderness all alone. And I'm so glad I stuck with it. Many of my colleagues in seminary, the rules and the religion and the doctrines were too important, and they quit seminary because they couldn't compromise. But because I stuck with it and trusted it, I replaced that little box with something deeper and richer and more meaningful. In other words, I was able to see that there were more crayons than red and green in my coloring box. But I was able to see all the colors that were around me. So what is it that you have inherited? What is it that you believe? Beliefs are deep. What are some of the beliefs that you still tell yourself? Maybe you grew up with someone telling you you were stupid or you were ugly or you never amount to anything. And even though the person told you that is not even on this planet, you have no clue where they are, that voice still continues to ring in your head. It's time to let that go because it's paralyzing you and it's keeping you hunched over. Maybe your beliefs are that there are certain people in this world that they look different, they act differently, they talk differently, and if you even imagine yourself allowing them to come in, they will destroy the fabric of all life. And I want to share with you that that's looking at the world from a red and green palette only. For the world is full of beautiful people, different people. And it's a glorious thing when you can see all the colors in the rainbow, when you can see all the colors in the morning sun, and you can see all the miracles that are around you, every one. I don't want you to think that this is a sermon that says right-brained people are good and left-brained people are bad. That's not what I'm saying here. For those of you who don't know, the right brain hemisphere of our brain typically is the imagination, language, creativity area of our brain. The left side is the mathematical, the scientific, the analytical. Architecture, engineering, a lot of mathematics in that, right? Frank Lloyd Wright did some pretty amazing stuff. The Guggenheim Modern Art Museum, it's not only a building that houses art, but it's a piece of art itself. A guy with a very left-brain analytical mind mathematically enjoys that type of way of thinking, but he used his imagination to see beyond that. The great cathedrals that I experienced in Europe, amazing works of architecture. Left-brain people came up with these beautiful creations. I'm thinking of our own finance team here at our church. In 2008 was a tough year for the Windermere Union Church, extremely difficult year for us. And people who are good with money, typically kind of a left brain activity, use an incredible amount of creativity, not only to help us through those difficult times and to find solutions, but help us to transcend those difficult times, you see? Albert Einstein, he saw the world in mathematics. But it was through the use of his imagination that he was able to imagine himself in a streetcar and a huge clock. And as he was moving away from the clock and he reached light speed, he was able to notice that the hands on the clock then stood still. You see? Left brain, mathematics, but imagination. So what I am suggesting that no matter if you're kind of more of an artistic, humanities, fine arts kind of person, or a mathematics, finance, and computer and left brain kind of person, this is a sermon for everyone to see that regardless of how you perceive the world around you, there is a plethora of color in this world for you to see. And if you get too caught up in the rules and the regulations, you won't see the beauty around you. You'll miss out on the miracles. What I see in this passage is this. Jesus is teaching us that what God is concerned more so than the doctrine and the rules and the traditions is how people are being healed and restored and liberated. Remember the play Fiddler on the Roof? The man with all the daughters, and the daughters were marrying outside of tradition. And the whole story is him battling with, does he keep the tradition and his daughters are dead to him in order to be true to tradition, or does he lighten up and see the world as a bigger place, you see? Why is it that people don't want to come to church anymore? For one, I think in our modern society, they're no longer threatened by the doctrines of the church that are going to send them to hell. They just choose not to participate. When we have our new member orientation and when I talk to people who are not in our church, this is what I usually hear. Oh, I was raised in the church, and as soon as I didn't have to go, I stopped going. Why? Because of the hypocrisy. Because people used religion to justify how cruel and how severely they would judge other people. And I can't buy into that. I don't believe that God's that way. And so if the church is going to survive in this day and age, then we must see the world through all the colors. That's why at the Windermere Union Church, we're more concerned about sharing our needs with one another and praying for one another and bringing healing to one another than whether or not we did the communion exactly right. Or if we followed the exact polity on doing a baptism. Or whether we sang the correct hymn for this particular service. Or we read the right scripture. Whether worship should be at this time or at this time. You see what I'm saying? What we're more concerned about here is that those of you who find yourself overwhelmed by physical ailments, by emotional ailments, by anything that keeps you bent over and paralyzed, that you find healing and liberation. And we are the agents to help that to happen. And as when you have been liberated from your ailment and from your healing, and you too now are standing up straight and tall, then you will then want to act and help others that you find in a similar situation. That's our purpose as church. Thank you. That is our purpose as church, to see the bent-over woman in the room who's been ailing with something for 18 years, and we bring her healing, we liberate her, and help her to stand tall. That's my prayer for each and every one of you. Whatever it is that has you bent over, whatever it is that has you severely burdened, whatever it is that helps you to see the world in black, white, red, and green, that our purpose is to open your spirit, open your soul, and for you to see that God is 64 colors in the Crayola crayon box and even more. That following Jesus is more than just keeping the rules and regulations, but to follow Jesus is even on the Sabbath. Why not the Sabbath? The most appropriate day to set somebody free. So what I hear Jesus teaching us is this. This is what I hear Jesus saying to us in our spiritual journey. There's so many colors in the rainbow. There's so many colors in the morning sun. There's so many colors in the flower, and I see every one. I hear Jesus teaching us this morning, there are so many colors in the rainbow, and so many colors in the morning sun, and so many colors in the people of God, and I see every one. Thus ends the lesson. Let us pray. God, you know each and every soul here. And it's my belief that in Jesus' time, that the rules and the traditions and the doctrines that were practiced religiously were based in a theology of fear. That somehow if we colored outside the lines, somehow if we saw the world differently, that your judgment would be quick and harsh. But God, Jesus shows us just the opposite. That you are life. You've created every color. You've created every creature. And that when our spirit is in tune with your spirit, and our soul is in tune with your soul, that the universe opens up to us. And we have the capacity to take it in and the capacity to let it out. So God, you know each and every soul here this morning. If there's a soul here who is afraid of you, then I pray that you show them the Crayola box and just tell them to get busy. If there's a soul here this morning who knows that they are hunched over from the burdens of life, addiction, emotional pain, emotional scars, negative talk from others, prejudice, bigotry, whatever case it may be, God, that they will take the risk to allow your hands to touch them, to help them to straighten up and see all the colors in the rainbow and the morning sun. We know all things are possible with you, God. And now let us experience the miracle of your bright and beautiful colored self among us. In Jesus, one of the most colorful people in history's name, we pray. Amen.